I've been attending the first meeting of the International Expert Working Group, in short IEWG, for the New Development Paradigm, in short NDP, which began on 30th January and concludes tomorrow. And I must say that the discussions are very serious and also very interesting. There are many illustrious members in the Expert Working Group, some of whom I had the privilege of interviewing. The first person you will meet is David Suzuki. He is an award-winning Canadian scientist, environmentalist, and also a broadcaster. His television program, The Nature of Things, is an immensely popular science magazine program and has been shown in at least 40 countries worldwide and completes its 53rd year on the Canadian television network this year. He shares more in this interview. Mr. Suzuki, you come from a background of science, but what fascinates me the most is how you've married this ability with broadcast, how you've taken your environmental messages across to an audience that you would have never had otherwise.
That's true.
Yeah, how did you make this decision to do so?
Well, you see, I grew up at a time, I went away to university when there was no television in my hometown. Mm. So I lived for many years not watching television at all. And it was only when I happened to do a program for a university I was teaching at in 1962 that I realized people watch this and they are very interested. And I thought, this is a powerful way to educate people. And I was concerned in the 1960s with the huge impact of science and technology on our lives. And the public didn't seem to understand what the implications were. I was a geneticist, and I was very concerned about the implications of genetic engineering and cloning and some of these techniques that were now being proposed to use on human beings. So that really got me interested in using television as a medium of education. And then as I became more involved and time went on, I began to see that the environment was the issue of our time. So,
but was it expected that the people would take to your programs the way they did?
Well, I was very fortunate. In 1969, I was asked to become the host of a program that had been started in 1960 called The Nature of Things. And it became an hour program, and it had a very big audience. People love nature. So natural history was a big part of this show. I was much more interested in science and technology, but it became a very popular program, and we were able to explore issues of satellites in space and birth control pill and overpopulation and many, many issues to a large audience.
You could take it away from the academia to actually an average human being and get them involved.
I was very lucky. My father was born in Canada, but he's Japanese, and he always said, you have to be able to speak in public. Japanese are very bad, they're so shy, and he said...
Pretty much like many Bhutanese.
Well, he trained me to be a public speaker. And then when I started doing television, he was very proud of me, and he would watch all my programs, and he would call me at the end of the program and say, well, that was good, but I didn't understand what you meant. And he said, I'm your father, I love you, and if I can't understand it, what do you think of the average person that doesn't even know who you are? You better make it better next time. So whenever I'm on television, I always try to imagine I'm talking to my father. So it better be clear, it better be very simple. He only went through high school. He wasn't an educated man, and he's my audience.
And your involvement with Bhutan now and with the new development paradigm, what pushed you to get involved in this?
I had heard of Bhutan for many years and been very, very excited by it. You see, I've been involved in environmental issues now for over 50 years. And although we've had many victories, we've built parks and reserves, we succeeded in stopping dams and drilling for oil. 30 years later, we're still fighting the same battle again. So a dam we stopped on the Peace River in British Columbia 35 years ago, they are now building it in British Columbia. What does that tell us? We didn't change the way we look at the world. The reason we didn't want the dam was because that meant retarding this river, flooding the land, and changing the ecology of the area. But now we say, oh no, we need that energy, we've got to get development of the mining industry, we have to build a dam. And we haven't seen that we have to take our surroundings very, very seriously. And that is the paradigm shift that Bhutan has been talking about. The well-being of all life means well-being for human beings. And the acknowledgement of that is a huge shift. Now, in the dominant culture around the world, we think the world is ours to use in whatever way we want. And there isn't that sense of respect or even veneration for Mother Nature. And so we become very, very destructive. Now, many environmental organizations have been fighting to try to bring about the change, but the economic system has become so powerful, and corporations are so powerful that we're just like little ants in this battle. And we know that we need to have that big change in the way we all look at the world. And here is tiny Bhutan, this tiny country. Because it has been isolated for so long, Bhutan has been able to come out into the world and see the reality of the world in a way that we can't see anymore, and has had the courage to say, we think the world needs a different way of seeing development, and we would like to present a new pattern of development. For me as an environmentalist, this is the most exciting thing that I've heard in 50 years.
You heard of Bhutan, you heard about GNH, and then you are finally here in the country now. And as an environmentalist yourself, you've seen Thimphu. What do you think? I mean, is Bhutan living what you're trying to share with the world?
Well, I think the people I've met in Bhutan will say, we are not there. Bhutan, since opening up, has become, I just look at in my room, I can watch 80 programs, 80 stations of television in my room. And yet 15, 20 years ago, you had no television at all. True. And what does television do? It's telling you, buy, look at our cars, look at our clothes, buy. But this is the very thing that we're fighting against in the developed world. So Bhutan is a country that has suddenly exploded into this world. And I heard from people here that young people want to move away from the farm, from the traditional. They want to go to the cities because it's more exciting and make a little more money. So Bhutan itself is now seeing this threat of the paradigm out there coming in. So the Bhutanese authorities here are saying, please develop a program for happiness and well-being that we can now try to be in Bhutan. Because otherwise, Bhutan, it seems to me, will rush after the same problems you have in India and China and everywhere else. I think you have this huge advantage of being like an island community. You're surrounded by mountains. And that itself gives you a much stronger sense of limits and being much more self-sufficient.
But then, of course, there is the reigning argument. I mean, does it have to be a versus relationship, versus economic forces around us, versus modernization and the way we're trying to live, the GNH way, that is, not too much of anything? Can we have a harmonious relationship? Can we marry what is in par with what we want to do with the new paradigm as well as with GNH?
Well,
do you think that's possible?
I personally don't think it's possible if the economic system that we buy into is the current one. You see, we have now globalized a fundamentally flawed economic system. For one thing, if you look at the air, where in our economic system do we put a value on air? To me, air is sacred. Every one of us has to breathe air every minute of our lives until we die. And yet we use air as a garbage can. Every car, every factory, everybody is putting stuff into the air as if it's free. Just use it as a garbage can. And the economic system only recognizes the value of air when we have to pay to clean it up. So it's the same with water. We use, and nature, what is the price of pollination? Pollinating flowering plants. All of the insects that pollinate flowering plants make it possible for animals like us to live. If the pollinators, and right now there's a crisis around the world with honeybees, they're dying, we don't know why. If all of the pollination disappears, we will disappear. The whole
it's all part of the ecosystem.
Terrestrial ecosystem will collapse. Without pollination, it will change fundamentally. And yet the economic system doesn't have any value. It doesn't say how important And so we spray chemicals all over that kill all of the insects without worrying about the effect on pollination. So the economic system has not got nature included as a part of what it is.
But let me interrupt you here. I mean, how do we negate that? Because the effect of the economic system is so direct, so immediate, that people feel it's them. While what you're talking about, pollination, you feel so far removed from it because it doesn't directly impact you as such. And then most human beings, now we're living in a situation where everything is so immediate. And only when it is immediate, it has an impact or bearing on what our lives are. So when it doesn't have an immediate bearing, that is the biggest challenge then. How do you convince people?
We have become a very impatient animal. And I think that the way we do that is that we think back on our ancestors and give thanks to them for the world that we've received today. And then we think ahead, not to the next paycheck or the next iPhone that you buy, but we think ahead to our children and grandchildren and think about what are we going to leave them? And we have to see that we live. This is where education is a fundamentally important thing. The new paradigm demands that we go back to the way people have always looked at nature. We regard Mother Nature as life, giving us life. That we worship Mother Nature. We thank Mother Nature. Now we're cut off. In my country, 85% of Canadians live in big cities. In a big city, your biggest priority is your job. So you're always worried about the economy. And we forget that air, water, soil, the rest of living things are making our lives possible. So we have to rediscover that sense of belonging and connection with all things on the planet.
That's why only the new paradigm can make a difference.
I think that we can't tinker and say, oh, well, we need some new taxes here so that they won't pollute the water. I mean, we need those indicators. But it's a mind shift that says, wait, you can't do that to the water. The water is sacred. The water gives us life. It connects us to the rest of the world through the hydrologic cycle. You can't use it as a garbage can. I mean, that's the mind shift that the new paradigm, it seems to me, will give us. So I come here saying thank you to Bhutan. Thank you for doing what you're doing, because this isn't happening around the world. And even though you're a small and, compared to us, you're not a rich country, thank you for doing it and committing to doing that.
The very popular David Suzuki talking to me at the International Expert Working Group's meeting for the New Development Paradigm. I also met another really interesting person all the way from Colorado called Hunter Lovins at the conference. You saw her earlier in a photograph with the Prime Minister as well. Lovins is a professor of sustainable business management with over 40 years' experience in energy, economic development and change management. She has authored several books, among which her bestseller is Natural Capitalism, Creating the Next Industrial Revolution. So the new development paradigm, then, you don't believe that it should completely replace the existing paradigm, the economic paradigm?
Over time, it will, but it won't tomorrow. The existing economic paradigm has served us for 500 years. And even if I wanted to get rid of it tomorrow, it's not going away anytime soon. Big companies exist, big flows of materials and commerce around the planet, the impact of Wall Street. I think what we have the opportunity to do here is to tell a better story about Bhutan's concept of gross national happiness and how this can enable all people to have a higher quality of life, to get what we look to the economic paradigm now to give us in ways that better enhance community, that deliver greater health and well-being in the population, that do a better job of taking care of this one planet that we have. And the interesting news is that doing this is better business. I work with companies around the world, and there are now 45 separate studies from the likes of Goldman Sachs and Harvard and MIT and McKinsey, all showing that the companies that are behaving more sustainably, are more profitable. And the Prime Minister has now asked some of these companies to come here to Bhutan to become part of this effort to make the concept of gross national happiness into the rising development paradigm so that we can do a better job of bringing genuine development to people who are poor, bringing greater health to communities that are suffering, and at the same time preserve a magnificent environment.
So what you're saying, actually what you were saying earlier in the conference, what we're practicing is bad capitalism. Capitalism on its own is not bad. You were even referring to Adam Smith and economy, how he actually talked about sustainability. And it is about sustainability at the end of the day. So stop demonizing the economy.
Yes, if something is unsustainable, what that means is it won't last. And the economic collapse that the world is in the middle of now is just one symptom of the unsustainability of the way we now do business. We have the opportunity to begin implementing business in a more sustainable way. And as I said, the good news is when you do it that way, it's more profitable. It creates more jobs. It delivers greater well-being. We have the opportunity to unleash entrepreneurs. Young people the world around want to solve the problems facing us and do it through business. And I think the reason the Prime Minister has asked me to come and be a part of this expert working group is that I work with businesses. I work with these young entrepreneurs. For example, I was just with some entrepreneurs from India who have a technology that will take the exhaust from burning anything, burning coal or burning wood, take the carbon dioxide and make it into carbon nanotubes. When you put carbon nanotubes into plastic or into cement, it makes it stronger. Industry wants carbon nanotubes, but at the moment they're very expensive to make. These young people have come up with a way of making them much less expensively in a way that takes the waste from conventional power plants. These kinds of better technologies are, if you will, part of the old economic paradigm. Entrepreneuring is part of the old economic paradigm, but it's also part of the new economic paradigm that we can solve these problems by focusing on businesses that are more sustainable.
So then you don't see a conflict between human beings and resources versus relationship. You don't see it in that manner.
Well, it is, if you will, a corollary of the round earth theory that resources are limited. There is only so much rock on the planet. There's only so much oil underground. The actual limits, though, are more in how we use resources. So the fossil fuel companies, the oil, gas, coal companies, have something like 2,790 gigatons of carbon locked up in the coal, in the oil, in the gas that's still in the ground. But the climate can withstand the emission of only something like 570 more gigatons. The glaciers in the Himalaya are melting. In my country this year, a superstorm hit New York and flooded the subways. Around the world, in the north of Africa, there are 18 million people now at risk of starving because the rains haven't come. We are already seeing the impact of climate change, as your Prime Minister says so well. And if we continue to burn all of that carbon that's still in the ground, we will have roasted earth. We will have huge human suffering the world around. So we are going to have to change.
So the way forward would be innovation.
Yes.
Innovative entrepreneurs.
Yes. And the big businesses. For example, there's a company called Unilever.
Yes,
makes
Unilever.
Cosmetics and a whole array of products. Their CEO, Paul Polman, 2 years ago said, we are going to implement the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. We're going to cut our environmental impact in half by 2020. We are going to source everything, every feedstock we get that comes from something that grows from sustainable agriculture, and we're going to lift 1 billion people out of poverty. This is the CEO of a major Fortune 100 company committing to sustainability. Walmart, which buys product from all over the world, has committed to go 100% renewable power, to buy sustainable products. This year they tied the rewards that they give to their buyers, the personal incentives, the bonuses, to whether or not the buyers are using a sustainability scorecard in picking this company as opposed to that company.
Wow.
The U.S. military is going renewable. Our Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, has called for the Great Green Fleet, ships powered by biofuel from algae,
Oh.
and fighter jets flying on biofuel. We have military bases that are converting to 100% renewable power. And the soldiers like it better. They have little rolls of solar panels that they, like on a nice sunny day like this, they would set out to run their communications, and they say it's lighter than the batteries we used to have to carry to run our radios. So it enhances our ability, in that case, to do war fighting, in the case of Walmart, to make money, and in the case of community, to have people living higher quality lives. So we're not calling for sacrifice and giving up, but rather for a transition to a much better way of living.
But then there is also the argument, what if you haven't reached that point where you have the luxury of doing away with some stuff? Because the examples that you pointed out to me, very successful people with enough resources, with enough options actually. But for a country like Bhutan, or for any other developing nation for the matter, where your dreams still lie ahead, you haven't reached that place, do you think it would be an option, a viable option, an attractive option, is what I'm asking you?
The concept of sustainability that is embedded in gross national happiness is, frankly, the only way that people like Bhutan, countries like Bhutan, the other developing countries, are going to be able to afford to develop. If we waste oil, you will pay a higher price for it. My country can outbid you on the world oil market. But if Bhutan shifts so that it's getting its energy from sun, from wind, from flowing water, from sustainable agriculture, these are things that you have here that can ensure that your homes are more comfortable. For example, I was just looking at the big building, which is very cold.
Banquet hall.
And
Yes.
looking at, could we put solar on the south side that would just pump hot air in all the time? It's a massive stone and masonry building. If you get the hot air flowing through it, that'll soak up the heat and then release it slowly over time. You'd have a very comfortable building.
And not very expensive.
And
way
not
of
very
doing it.
expensive. Whereas if you try to heat it with oil or coal or even electricity, that's electricity you could have been selling to India. So why waste it? Which is what we're doing now. We have electric space heaters running. You ought to be making money
That's
off
a
that
very important
electricity
example.
and using the sun to heat your buildings.
One more expert at the International Expert Working Group's conference for the New Development Paradigm caught my attention when she said, in quotes, democracy must be reclaimed for progress. So I had to interview Frances Moore-Lappé, who has studied world hunger and its solutions extensively and is co-founder of the Institute for Food and Development Policy. She also coined the term living democracy, which we talk about at length in the interview. So how did democracy become so intrinsically related to what you do and what you love doing, actually?
I began in my 20s. I had an intuition that if I could just understand why is there hunger in the world, I would figure out a path for myself. I'd have a sense of direction in my life because that seemed so basic. Food, right? Everybody wants to eat. Everybody has to eat. So I finally figured out that, wait, hunger is not caused by a scarcity of food. There's more than enough food in the world to make us all quite stout. No, it's not caused by a scarcity of food, was my little soundbite. It is a scarcity of democracy. And so I had this idea that what I meant by that is that people are hungry because they don't have voice. They don't have power over what it takes to grow and secure food for themselves in some way or other. And that reflects an absence of democracy, understood as a culture that's accountable to the citizens. But honestly, since I had that insight 40-something years ago, I have been working absolutely every day to explain to myself and to see, what do I mean then? What is democracy that's strong enough to end hunger and to really allow all of us to flourish? And I realized that a big obstacle is that most of us absorb the notion today in the world that democracy really is two things. It's voting and a market, and that's not enough. So gradually I came to see that I had to explain that no, that cannot work. That ends up such concentrated wealth that you may call it a democracy, as we have in the US, but it's not, because it's not accountable to the people. So I've been seeking and trying to show what I mean by this culture of democracy that is vital, that is strong, that is aligned with human nature, because human beings, to thrive, we need to know that we count, that we have voice, that we have some control over our well-being, right? And so my concept then I came to about 15 or so years ago is what I call living democracy. That it's not just voting in a marketplace, but it is a daily practice. It is a culture of mutual accountability, so that it's not just even little kids. Let me take you right into the classroom. Okay, a culture of democracy, living democracy. How does that look in a school? Well, it's not just children learning that, they sit there patiently and they take what's given to them, but they have responsibility to be part of creating an environment, their learning environment, and be learning how to work in their community. So what I mean by living democracy is a culture that actually shows up in every dimension of our public lives, from education of little children, in economic life, do we have a voice, say, in worker-owned businesses and cooperatives, and in politics, it's not just in voting for the right person, but actually coming together, deliberating together as citizens and being part of finding solutions too. So I just give you an example from education. We think, well, the goal of education is to have these well-behaved youngsters sitting there absorbing, what is being given to them. But in a living democracy idea of education, children are learning from the earliest age that they have voice and they are accountable also for the solutions. And it actually enhances their learning because they have motivation. So for example, in the United States, where I come from, there are groups in which children learn what they call Apprentice Citizenship. So they're engaged and out in the community, say, doing environmental restoration. Or in one case, I interviewed a child who was helping littler children learn safety measures, to wear a helmet if they were out on their bicycles, that sort of thing. And he was so happy. He said, I might be saving lives. Imagine that. And then his academic performance, his reading and writing was better because he had motivation. And so this idea of living democracy it's not a set system that we have once and for all, a good governance. It is a set of system values that permeates every aspect of our lives. And those values have to do with inclusion, with fairness, with mutual accountability. So it's not just pointing the finger and saying, oh, you bad work, you bad boss, you treated, but how do I organize workers to stand up and say, here, we have certain rights here, and we have a responsibility to stand up for what we deserve. So it's this mutuality of expectation, and the idea that democracy we learned. We're not born knowing how to read and write, but we learn it. We may not be born knowing how to do democracy well, but it is an art. It is an art. And another example from the US is we have schools in which very small children are learning how to mediate argument. So when there's a fight on the school ground, they don't just run to the teacher and say, Ms. So-and-so, come and solve this because Johnny hit me, right? They learn that they go to the mediator and they hear both sides of how this fight started, and then they agree, they come to an agreement. So that's learning not just behavioral improvement. That to me is learning that, oh, I can solve this. I don't have to just turn to somebody else to solve it, and it's up to me to have the courage. And so courage is another very important piece of living democracy.
So then with this then, the background that you come from then, and the new development paradigm, the discussion that's going on, and you are part of the International Experts Working Group. This is what you want to bring to the table. This is what you think the new development paradigm should actually advocate as well.
I do. I think the new development paradigm must reflect back to the world a deeper understanding of democracy. It's not just enough to stick with the economic failure of our dominant economic model that is so concentrating wealth and destroying so much of our earth. But why is that happening? I think it's happening on one level because we haven't evolved these democratic decision-making cultures. Because I think here's the question I've been asking all my life. Why are we together creating a world that not one of us as individuals would choose? Because if you sat down anywhere with anybody, they wouldn't choose to have children dying of hunger or destroying the earth for future generations, but we're doing it. We're doing it together because so far we haven't stepped up to create decision-making that really matches our common sense and our sensibilities for one another, which are innate. We have innate compassion. So this to me is a critical piece of the new paradigm, and the languaging of it is very tricky because, as I say, democracy for most people is just something distant, remote. Once a year, maybe you vote or maybe not.
The danger is apathy then when you use this term democracy.
Yes, and people say, oh, that look at. So but I'm determined to find the language, and I've put this word living in front of it to suggest that has several meanings. It's something we live on a daily basis, and it's a living entity because it's not fixed and finished ever. It's always evolving. We grow up in the United States and we're told, oh, we inherited a democracy and aren't we fortunate? No, we have to create it, and we don't have that spirit about us. And that's what I want to spark in my own country, that we are losing the core of our democracy. So that's to me a very, very important part of the new paradigm, and I'm so grateful for the leadership of Bhutan to be a country where the whole country is stepping up and asking these deepest questions with the gross national happiness, because then that brings you to the question, what is it that could promote gross national happiness? That takes us to these foundational questions.
So these are the kind of experts that make up the international working group that will draw up the new development paradigm. The lineup is pretty impressive, to say the least. There are people at the gathering, though, who feel that maybe more Bhutanese need to be involved.
It's so wonderful to have all these experts here visiting Bhutan. They bring so much weight and so many years of education and thinking around these issues. I'm working here in Bhutan with DHI, but in my personal capacity, I see that there's really an opportunity to be more inclusive of the citizens of Bhutan in this conversation. And not necessarily in the working groups, but just in the dialogue, so that it is something that is open for everybody to have a voice in, whether it's in the news, in the paper, amongst friends. I think that the dialogue really needs to come to each citizen on that level. So more inclusivity around the issues that are being discussed would be beneficial to the entire process.
This, however, just happens to be the starting point for many more discussions in the movement that is expected to herald a transformation in the way development is viewed the world over. Bhutan has taken on the lead role in this revolutionary movement and is being supported by a very distinguished group of international experts. I guess the only thing left to say is good luck, and that as Bhutanese, we do look forward to the submission of the new development paradigm inspired by GNH to the UN in 2014.